Hi, I'm Marissa Banks.
And I'm Angelica Cesarba.
And today we will be presenting the Location and Transportation Credit Access to Quality Transit. According to the USGBC, the Location and Transportation category rewards thoughtful decisions about building location with credits that encourage compact development, alternative transportation, and connection with amenities. This category aims to take advantage of pre-existing infrastructure such as road networks, public transit, and pedestrian walkways when considering the design and location of a new project.
This LEED accreditation hopes to encourage development in locations with multiple transportation choices and to reduce motor vehicle use. This in turn reduces greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, and other environmental and public health harms associated with automotive transportation. Essentially, compact walkable communities located near public transit provide alternatives to driving that end up benefiting the environment as well as the health and well-being of the community in question. One way that this benefits the community is financially. For example, for every $1 invested in public transportation, we generate a income return of $4. Every $1 billion invested in public transportation supports and creates more than 50,000 jobs, and every $10 million yields $30 million in increased business sales. Additionally, individuals within the community also save money and can use that towards bettering the community. The average household spends 18 cents of every dollar on transportation. 96% of this goes into buying and maintaining a car, which means that a household can save nearly $10,000 a year by taking public transport. And then public transport is also safer than cars. The following graph quantifies the fatalities of transport-related accidents between 2000 and 2014. We can see that public transit passengers have a far lower traffic casualty rate than automotive passengers. In fact, a more recent study by the American Public Transportation Association found that a person can reduce his or her chances of being in an accident by more than 90% by taking public transport as opposed to commuting by car. And then, of course, public transport reduces greenhouse gas emissions. As you can see, nearly all forms of public transit create fewer CO2 emissions per passenger mile than single occupancy vehicles. And then finally, public transport encourages redevelopment. Essentially, it reduces the conversion of farmland and open space, which promotes restoration of downtown areas and the restoration of declining city neighborhoods. So access to quality transit is quantified through distance from access to major transit stops. And various developments meet different requirements for the locations of functional entries to public transportation and pedestrian traffic. But before we get into the specific, here are the steps. So essentially, you would identify transit stops within a certain distance of the building in question. This includes existing stops, temporary stops, or any sort of planned stop. You would then classify transit based on vehicle type. So there's a difference in points between bus, streetcar, rideshare versus rapid transit, rail stations, and ferries. You would then confirm walkability to the station or transit in question. There's a different way to count the aggregate trips. In order to be counted, you must have a paired route. That means service in opposite directions. For these opposite directions, only the trip in one direction is counted, but you do need to have it going in both directions. And then if there are multiple stops from the same route within walking distance, only one of the stops is counted. And at the end, you would calculate all the points earned. But we will go into further details later.
As previously mentioned, there are various development types that correspond to different point structures. So just to lay it all out, new construction is 1 to 5 points possible. Core and shell projects are 1 to 6. Schools range from 1 to 4 points, and then data centers, warehouses and distribution centers, hospitality and retail projects are also 1 to 5 points, and then healthcare development is 1 to 2 points.
So different developments need to meet different requirements in order to be awarded these points. These development types are grouped into 3 categories, with school and healthcare developments having a different guideline than the remainder. And then sort of going into it, this first category includes new construction, core and shell, data centers, warehouses and distribution centers, as well as hospitality projects. And essentially, the entry of the transit needs to be located 1/4 of a mile walking for buses, streetcars, and ride shares, and 1/2 mile walking for rapid transit, rail stations, and ferry terminals. So then the transit service at stops and stations must meet the minimums listed in tables 1 and 2, which I will pull up right now. And this sort of describes the weekend trip and the weekday and weekend trips requirements for the certain points by different transit types. And then we'll move on to healthcare now. The guidelines are the same, 1/4 of a mile walking distance for bus, streetcar, and rideshare, and then 1/2 of a mile for rapid transit, rail stations, and ferries. And then the tables look very similar. We did get rid of the maximum number of weekend and weekday trips on both graphs, and the points are awarded slightly differently.
And our last category is schools. So when considering schools, there are 2 options that you can go 2 different routes. The first one is transit served location, and then the second is option 2, which is pedestrian access. So transit, option 1, the transit served location, similar guidelines to healthcare and new construction and the rest of the development types. Once again, it's 1/4 mile walking distance of existing or planned bus, streetcar, or rideshare stops, or 1/2 mile walking distance of existing or planned bus, ride transit stops, light, heavy, and commuter rail stations, or commuter ferry terminals. And then these transit service stops must meet the minimums in tables 1 and 2. And then option 2 for schools is the pedestrian access. So this is a little different since it's walkability pedestrian based. So this is the pedestrian oriented, and it is based on the project attendance boundary. So that means that a specified percentage of students living within the area, such as 3/4 mile walking distance for grades 8 and below and 1.5 mile walking distance for grades 9 and above, need to have access to a functional school entrance. And then additionally, the project site allows the pedestrians access from all residential neighborhood housing planned student population. And then these percentages are outlined in table 3 and then the corresponding points awarded for them. And then when we think about LEED buildings, we know that we have a bunch on campus. So some of the LEED accredited buildings that have received points for the access to quality transit are the Business Instructional Facility, as well as Nugent Hall, which both received 1 out of 1 points for having an entrance located within 1/4 mile of 2 or more public or campus bus lines. And then the Chemistry Annex and the State Farm Center were both awarded 6 out of 6 points, and that was for their proximity to bus rapid transit stations and rideshare locations. And then after going through this topic and its intent and requirements, we found some questions that were likely to be seen on the LEED GA or those similar. So we just wanted to present those with you. So question 1 is, what is a likely benefit for a project that will be located in an urban area near a residential neighborhood? A, opportunity to redevelop a brownfield. B, access to racks for bicycle storage. C, reduce stormwater runoff. And D, access to public transportation. And the answer is D, access to public transportation. And then question 2 is to meet the requirements of LT access to quality transit, school option 2, which as previously mentioned is the pedestrian access option. What is the minimum percentage of student population that needs to live within no more than a 3/4 mile walking distance for grades 8 and below and 1.5 mile walking distance for grades 9 and above? A, 30%, B, 40%, C, 50%, or D, 60%? And the answer is C, 50%. You can refer back to Table 3 under the school option 2 requirement, pedestrian access, for that, and then the corresponding points awarded as well. And that concludes our presentation for LT access to quality transit. We hope that this was very helpful and that it helped you prepare for the exam.